think I got more room.
Oh, I'm happy to see all y'all. All y'all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Belated. 666, man, the number of the beast. Hell and Fire was born to be released. That's been a while since I listened to that, but not bad, I would think, for Eddie, right? There you go. If you don't get it, you can come look at his shirt, and you with this little kid think I'm talking to you, and now you're thinking, my God, he's putting satanic verses over me. All right, I apologize. In the biggest snafu of all time, they've given me this walk, and I'm also in charge of the music muster, who I hope all of you will go and see after you get finished with this great walk that we're having here today. Yeah, so I had a band not show up last night. Can you imagine that, Al? And that wasn't that. I've been playing catch up. That's about all I can say. So Matt was never punctual to begin with. He usually walks up 3 minutes before the program, but today he walked up 3 minutes after. And picked up one other person in the parking lot. So I added to my total right over here. Thank you. Thank you very much. We discussed modern politics, red lights, and the merit of running those red lights at various locations in Gettysburg and how we've done that in order to get here. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go from it's an unusual tour, but this time of year I like to do this kind of tour. We're not going to cross the field. I hope everybody got that off the paperwork that we had today.
Thank you.
Yeah. One last time, right? So it was, and to be honest, you know, we just get tired of it. The staff, not from doing it with y'all, but we do this, we cross this field an awful lot with school groups. You know, sometimes I'll do it twice a day. Sometimes I'll do it 5 or 6 times a week. And you know, I know all of you visit here at Gettysburg and so forth, but we know where every pothole is out there, all right, crossing that field. So what I wanted to do today is we're basically going to start here, and we're going to remain on Seminary Ridge, and we're going to go down to North Carolina, which is the way you passed it coming here today if you parked. And we're going to make a big trip coming back. With this big a group, it'll get kind of tight, but we'll make do because we have no choice. We're going to take the horse trail and give you a different view, and I'm going to point out, instead of looking this way, we're going to look this way, all right, which I hope is something new for you, because everybody when they're driving down the road is always looking to the left, all right, instead of the right. And there's a lot that happens back here, which I hope you'll enjoy the stories on that. So we're going to do basically the before and after of Pickett's charge, but we're not going to do Pickett's charge. Does that make sense? So, yeah, weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, truly weird. All right, so this is the show. Do I have any stories for you?
Gotta have one or two.
You gotta have one or two right there. I can't think of anything that's happened that will be out of the realm. I got a speeding ticket about 5 miles from my parents' home. I did 850 miles, no, excuse me, 845 miles and got a ticket 5 miles. But I was happy to say that all the funds went to my home county.
So were they.
Yeah, young guy. I said, I'm from here. He goes, where's your insurance? I said, it's a rental. I said, I'm coming from Montgomery. I went to Hank Williams, took these kids in the back to see Hank Williams' Cadillac. The one he died in. The girls are in the back. Yeah, he died in there. He drank too much cold beer. And everything. And I needed them to cry, but they were too petrified to do something like that. So I said, I got 3 screaming kids in the back. You know, at 800 miles, they're tired with the detour to Montgomery. And we're coming out. We're speeding, obviously, 79 and a 55. I'm tired. Back's hurting, you know, and everything. So, anyway, he didn't buy that. So, I got a ticket. So, I went to see the judge. What was his name?
The hanging judge, that one.
No, he wasn't the hanging judge. He's a guy from out of Holka, which I knew was bad in the first place because I'm not from Holka, population 500, and he was going to support the hometown folks. But anyway, my mother knew him from somewhere, and I went up there and told him I was Betty Atkinson's son, and I needed to see him. And the lady that was sitting up front at the desk said, "This is what a small town will get you. There's nobody else in there." He goes, "Well, let's just go on back and see him then." And so I just follow her behind the courtroom. We go on back. She goes to the door, and she stands at the door, and she says, "Judge, there's a man from Pennsylvania wants to talk to you about a speeding ticket." And in the judge's chambers I went and everything. I sat down and I said, "I'm Betty Atkinson's son." "Oh, how's Miss Betty?" And everything. And when I went on and everything, I said, "Judge, I'd really like to get this thing squared away before I leave Pennsylvania. I'm pulling out on Sunday." This is a Friday right there. And he goes, "Well, Matt, I don't know much we can do about it. If you're welcome to come back here in October if you'd like, and we'll set a schedule, and maybe the officer would like to withdraw his affidavit." Yeah.
Because you're going back in October.
Yeah, like I'm gonna come back in October. So $166 speeding ticket versus a $600 trip. So I paid. That's my story. Right there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And remember, everybody's going to the music muster, right? If it, I should have brought the schedule. I've just passed out 200. They're actually at the Dobbins house too. If you happen to be down on Steinway, they're rotating through there. They'll be in the lobby of the visitor center and in that big tent. If y'all haven't been up there yet, that big tent that's outside the main entrance right there. And one of them brought me. Here's another story. One of the ladies brought me handwritten out, "Oh Susanna, don't you cry for me." And she brought that out, and it's got 3 notes on it. I think it's G, A, and then you get to the chorus, and there's like 4 notes. But I'm going to try to learn that. And I'm going to play "Oh Susanna." For everybody, thank you, thank you. With the capo.
We'll learn you.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to start here, and I'm going to start where you would last expect me to start. And we're not even dealing with Pickett's charge. We're going to be dealing with 1907, and that is when, ladies and gentlemen, actually the movement began to create a monument to Virginia and to Robert E. Lee, right up here. One of the things that you might be surprised to know, ladies and gentlemen, is that there was a debate as far as the Virginia monument right here, whether they wanted 2 separate monuments. Do you want a monument to Robert E. Lee and Virginia, or do you want a Virginia monument with Robert E. Lee with it? Have you ever thought about that? They actually have a combination here. If you look, this is officially the Virginia monument. So if you think about that, there was a debate. The bureaucratic side of it is in October 23rd, at the Virginia Confederate Veterans Reunion at Norfolk, Virginia, they passed a resolution. Lindsay Lomax, who was at present, if some of you might know him, if you know some arcane Confederate generals, yes, well, you know, he's going to be involved in this. And it goes, this resolution that the vets passed goes to Governor Claude Swanson, who backed the proposal the next year in 1908. And so the legislature formed a commission of 5 members and dedicated, or earmarked, I guess is a better word, $50,000 toward the monument, with $8,000 for dedication expenses. That's a heck of a lot of money, to say the least, especially for the early 1900s. Okay, so the commissioner's first action was to determine a suitable location for the monument. And 2 locations were proposed. One here near Spangler's Woods, where Lee watched Pickett's charge, more about that later in the tour, and the other on Cemetery Ridge at the breakthrough of the Virginians. In other words, they basically wanted to put it up over there. So every Yankee that came to the high water mark would have to stand in the shadow of Robert E. Lee. Secretary of War rejected the Cemetery Ridge idea. But why is that, though? But why is that? Because Confederate monuments cannot be placed on the Union side. can't be done. And remind me when we get to the 11th Mississippi Monument over there to tell you that story, okay? Do that. So, that settled the question. They're going to put the monument up over here. Okay, so the designs were solicited. They still had not figured out which one they wanted to do, though. Submissions had to include one proposal with Lee mounted and one without him mounted. Interesting. And they had still not made the decision whether to separate the state from the Lee monument or not. So 40 artists submit plans, and William Sievers, if I'm pronouncing that right, S-I-E-V-E-R-S, his submission won out, and his original plan called for 3 figures at the base of the monument, 2 soldiers on each flank, and a Minerva figure in the center, which is going to be getting into like Greek gods and goddesses right there. All right, you just keep. I need a Greek expert, and you're sitting on that rock, and you're going to come right in. You're going to come right in.
Bite my tongue. I'm not going to tell you about my traffic ticket. Go ahead.
Oh, you got one too? Mm-hmm. I have a 2 choice words for him. I was like, and I'm like 2 months away from joining the Masons. I bet he was a Mason too. I could have walked. Whatever. On the day he dies, when I'm passing by, what I do on his grave won't pass for flowers.
Listen. Take a deep breath. Let it go. Deep breath. Let it go.
So Matt, you consider speed limits merely a suggestion?
Merely a suggestion, madam. Merely a suggestion. That's right. I want you to know that I've been falsely accused. I was not doing 79. I was only doing 77. Well, I have been doing 85. But I defy the gentleman to ride 800 miles with 2 3-year-olds in the back seat. And not speed. So, he got rid of the Minerva, obviously, because you don't see it over there. And the artist later abandoned the idea for a large group of 7 figures, and he described his design as such. All right? Why don't we do this? Much more. Why don't we do this? Why don't we all, because we're going to be walking this way anyway, why don't we all step out here on the concrete so you can actually see the figures? You'll not be able to see the figures.
You know, you ought to try doing this professionally. I just came to heckle.
Thank you. Okay. I appreciate it. I'll try to keep you on the axle. Now make sure you get over here, because you can see Robert E. Lee's face right over here. Okay, and that's gonna make a grand design right there. How do I look? Do you see the resemblance?
He looks younger.
Oh, that's funny, man. Everybody's got joke. And the Orioles. No, I get it, but did you watch that game last night?
I did not, no.
It wasn't pretty.
No. We were down 4-0, came back, took the lead, and lost. How is that possible? Yeah. All right, so the artist said this. He said, the group is intended to represent the 3 branches. This is quotes, by the way. The group is intended to represent the 3 branches of military service that took part in the battle: infantry, artillery, and cavalry. The several characters are drawn from various walks of life. The figure to the extreme left, biting off the end of a paper cartridge, might well be the average man about town. The next, a mechanic. The bearded figure is of the professional type. I guess that's to do with the musket right there. And The gawky figure with charging bayonet, a farmer. Well, these four characters are infantrymen. The figure with the pistol and the bugler are artillerymen. The mounted youth, a cavalry standard bearer, shows refinement, supposedly from the well-to-do class, and being possessor of a saddle horse landed him in the cavalry. The figures in general are intentionally robust to symbolize the vigor of the Confederate Army. The battered and scattered military equipment merely record incidents of the battle, symbolic of the struggle. End of quote. Only two major changes were made before casting. One was the pose of an infantryman, and the other changed the flag from the stars and bars to the Virginia state flag. Most people miss that. They always think it's a Confederate flag. It is not. It is actually a Virginia state flag. And if you ever read George Stewart's book, which is a good book, it's well written, some mistakes, every book has mistakes in, but George Stewart, you don't hear about this one anymore, S-T-E-W-A-R-T. He was a novelist, and he wrote a narrative history of Pickett's charge. He makes one mistake in there about the Virginians carrying Virginia state flags in the charge, which obviously they did not. I wonder if he got that from this statue right here. So if you ever read that book again, they're everywhere on eBay if you want to do that. 50 cents is the going price. Now for the statue on top, the artist Seaver studied photographs of Lee intently to get the statue right. He took dimensions from Traveler's skeleton at Washington and Lee University and used a horse with the same height as a model. And I believe, don't quote me, but I believe Traveler was like 17 hands high, which is a big horse. And horse talk right there. Did we install a railroad track? No, it's, yes. We were actually to show you what park rangers do before and after, while you're not at the front desk. We were discussing the incident at Mont Alto Speedway and the Rolling Stones at this very morning, which is a piece of trivia which comes to motorcycles you should look up right here. Okay. Lee's uniform is based off the originals in the Museum of the Confederacy. Now the groundbreaking ceremonies were conducted on May 6, 1912. The pedestal is 24 feet high, 10 feet wide, 13 feet 7 inches long. The base is 28 feet by 32 feet. The monument stands, therefore, at 41 feet. Where y'all going?
We gotta go back for a program.
What are you talking about? The program's this way. We haven't even made the charge. Did you capture that? They won't get the humor in it. You can't do that. The monument is dedicated on June 8, 1917, and that date coincided with the large Confederate reunion in Washington, D.C. So a lot of the veterans probably took the train ride up here to make this ceremony, which I'm sure it was groundbreaking to say. A lot of people for the groundbreaking to say the least. All right, so we'll get back to 1863. And we're going to get into, as I said earlier, we're going to get into the pre-Pickett's charge and the post-Pickett's charge and what happened. Okay, so you have to remember, why don't we do this? I know I'm going to have everybody squinting in the sunlight, but let's about face for a minute if you can stand the sunlight. And those of you that thought you were safe in the back are now in the front. Right back over there. That's good. I can honestly say I've never seen that one. Chewy is my co-pilot. All right. And at this point, we'll be talking about how General James Longstreet caused the Confederate defeat by being tardy. Some people just showed up. You wouldn't get that joke unless you were here, since you If you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, brief rehash. Now, I got a lot of people in this crowd, and some people have been out here and studied this battle more than they should have, and some people are just being introduced into it. You know, some people like to watch Star Wars movies instead, or maybe go see Star Wars while with an Iron Maiden background while you're doing that. Which I've actually had an Iron Maiden beer, which probably you haven't. So I am the greatest fan of all time. It's Cleveland, Ohio, actually. So if you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, July 2nd, remember Pickett's charge is July 3rd. You have to remember that there was an echelon attack that took place that day, all right? When an echelon attack, that means that it was like a row of dominoes. They were stepping off from right to left. The Confederate attack, in other words, was rolling from the south to the north. And each brigade was tripped off the one next to it. So this one goes forward, then this one goes forward, then this one goes forward. So the attack is going to, long story short, it's going to roll its way all the way up to this area. And in this area would have been Ambrose Wright's Georgia Brigade. And on the evening of July 2nd, hard to say what time, probably 6:30. Some people might put it a little earlier, a little after. But Wright's Georgia Brigade is going to head out, and they are going to pierce the Union line momentarily at Seminary Ridge. As you look across the field right there, you see a single tree, and to the right of that you see a clump of trees. The single tree on the left is the angle, and the clump of trees is the objective point for Pickett's charge, arguably on July 3rd, all right? So, what is the point here? Wright's brigade, Wright's Georgians are going to momentarily pierce that Union line, and some people think that that is going to prompt Robert E. Lee to try the assault on July 3rd. Why? Because he had attacked up the middle on July 2nd, one brigade. They are not properly supported. That's a story within its own right, but y'all can research that. Right? Wright is not supported, and he is basically repulsed, hurled back out of the Union position like a bouncing rubber ball, as one Confederate quoted after the war. And he comes back here and the remnants begin to reform. Well, Lee had to know about that. There is another premise, which is not based on any fact, but it is somewhat plausible, that Lee had tried both ends of the flanks, and therefore the center must be weak. A lot of you have probably heard that before. That is not written anywhere, by the way, but it is plausible that Lee might think that way. So if you think about it in those terms, Robert E. Lee is going to launch across through here. He had had some success, definitely on the first day. On the second day, though, he had gained the Peach Orchard. He had crushed other portions of the Union Army. He gets 2 Union Corps on the first day. He destroys the 3rd Corps, literally named the 3rd Corps on the second day. Portions of the 5th Corps had been beaten up, if not the entire 5th Corps. Portions of the 6th Corps, the 12th Corps, all of those had been engaged. And they had all been pulled down here. He had sustained many casualties, though, on July 2nd. Johnson's division over on Culp's Hill was relatively fresh. You could argue that some of Pender's brigades that hadn't been engaged on the first day were fresh. Smith's brigade of Early's division, Jubal Early's division, Mahone and Posey of Anderson's divisions were in good shape too. So therefore, many of the losses sustained by the Confederates on the second day could still be made good on the third day if he chose the units wisely that he was going to pick to make the attack. So the question is, why assault on the third day? The morale of the Army was still high, even though they hadn't won the second day. Pretty much a draw, I guess you could say. If not a Union victory, the morale's still high. Second, because advantageous ground had been taken which provided good artillery positions. When we administer, I guess for lack of a better word, the War Department, Park Service, when we maintain the peach orchard today, we are maintaining the Union position. That is what we are identifying to the general public. What we don't identify to the general public is that the Confederates held that on the evening of July 2nd. On the morning of July 3rd, you have to turn the cannons around. They're not pointed this way, they should be pointed that way. And if you look at it from reverse, it actually is a great Confederate artillery position, which most people don't look at. And because reinforcements had arrived, that's the third reason to renew the assault. Specifically, 2 bodies of men. One would be Jeb Stuart and the Confederate cavalry, and the other one would be what?
Pickett.
That's right. Where did Al go? Al, I need some assistance back here behind you. All right. You can tell them that we aren't moving. And that's why, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, Robert E. Lee is going to determine to renew the assault on the 3rd day. All right, so why don't we do this? Why don't we all take a left, because we're starting to sweat and we don't want to do that in the government. Let's go over there to the other side of that cannon where you see that big tree, and we'll reassemble in the shade. Cover on it to get the originals. It's been reprinted a lot. And I say 50 cents. You can sometimes pick it up, you know, $1 or something like that. It's not the end all. I mean, Earl Hess's book taught me so much from a tactical standpoint, but if you want a good read, I mean, Stewart's good. You know, I often wonder why, and I feel sorry for him, like, nothing to do with, I'm actually reading Grant Moves South, which is actually about, not Virginia, it's about Vicksburg, but that's Bruce Catton. And I've often wondered why these old authors get swept under the rug, because you just don't hear about them. Maybe because they're dead and they're no longer here to promote themselves, you know, or something. Or maybe it's just not fresh. But that Bruce Catton, I hate to say I've never read much Bruce Catton, but he's a great writer, you know, newspaper man. And those newspaper men turned historians usually are pretty good, you know.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
But you don't think that Lee gave it away with the Georgians on the 2nd, and that's why Meade reinforced the center? Because he had an idea that's where he was going to attack. Supposedly he said that to his men.
Okay, well, let's answer that very question. It's going to be a prolonged answer, okay? Which is actually was my next point, and I thank you for that segue right there. Good God.
I'm sorry.
What is it with people wearing like imperial shirts nowadays?
Can't find good help.
Nobody ever wears like the rebel shirts. They always wear like it's TIE fighters or you know, Darth Vader or something like that. I don't get it. Is that
It's
what?
Confederate red, come on.
Okay, Confederate red. All right, but if you're gonna be the rebels, you can't be the imperial. Although in the 70s, I had to utilize the Death Star soldiers as the Confederates because they had gray uniforms on. You know, they would actually fight the stormtroopers in the Galactic Civil War. Wait. You're just wondering why, right? Why? Okay, so why is he going to try the center? To get off into it, I mean, we could sit up here. I wrote an article every 2 years. We've skipped a few years every now and then, but used to, especially under the Hartwig administration, we had nothing wrong with that. We had a seminar every 2 years, and during the wintertime, what occupied a lot of the Rangers' times is we would sit around and write articles after the seminar was over. And then we would publish those articles about a month later. I think, now there'll be a mad rush, about half the people leave here. I think the last seminar books are now in the bookstores. Anybody seen them? I know
Yes,
they came
they
out.
are.
Have they? They are, okay? If you want to get something, if you're looking for something rare, most people, the average visitor doesn't pick those up. And once they're gone, they're gone. But I wrote an article on Pickett's charge, and this is the basis of this talk right here. And basically, I was trying to figure out what did the Confederates intend to do versus what actually happened here. On the morning, so this is this portion of the talk. On the morning of July 3rd, ladies and gentlemen, Robert E. Lee gets up. He usually was an early riser. Depending on what was going on, he could sometimes get up at 2 in the morning. Probably he would more likely be up at 3 or 4 in the morning. Early dawn is what they would describe it back then. But Lee had a lot on him. He gets up. On the night of July 2nd, we know that the Confederate Corps commanders did not get together. That unlike George Meade was doing at midnight on July 2nd, Robert E. Lee did not summon his principal lieutenants to his headquarters and have a council of war. That is probably a big oversight on Robert E. Lee's part. He probably should have done that. We know that there were, at the very least, verbal orders written. If there was written orders, oh, I thought you were going to get a seminar book. If there was written orders, ladies and gentlemen, they don't survive. But we know from E.P. Alexander, for example, Abercrombie Alexander, who is Longstreet's big artilleryman, that they received orders on the night of July 2nd to prepare the artillery for an assault on July 3rd. This is well before the sun comes up, okay? So he's talking about that. So it filtered down from Longstreet's headquarters to be prepared for action. Robert E. Lee writes in his report, and Lee says a lot in his report, but like every report is what he doesn't say. Lee is basically reiterates the facts. Lee does not put opinions in his reports very often. That's why you would really love to be able to interview him. But he says, on the night of July 2nd, talking about July 3rd, he says one sentence in there. He says the general plan was unchanged. The general plan was unchanged. So what that means is, at least to me, welcome to the Battle of Gettysburg, is that Robert E. Lee is planning on renewing the same offensive on July 3rd that he had done on July 2nd. Except this time he's going to augment Longstreet's Corps with Pickett's division. Remember, on July 2nd, out of 3 divisions in Longstreet's Corps, only 2 of them are in the engagement on the 2nd. The third one, George Pickett is not going to be.
Speaking of the devil.
Speaking of the devil, he will come right here. You want to turn this way, and then you turn this way. See, you wore this shirt out here so I would have somebody. He could be my background. Who needs a PowerPoint right here? So this is George Pickett.
The hat doesn't go with the shirt.
Well, no, the hat doesn't go with the shirt. Let's hug it out.
He's neutral.
Neutral.
He's
Yes.
Switzerland.
A man of many sizes.
50-50.
All right, so George Pickett, the general plan's unchanged. Robert E. Lee is going to renew the assault. Now, this is where you get into written orders versus verbal orders. Like I said, must have been verbal orders or the written orders don't exist. So Lee awakes at dawn. He goes riding down right through here, probably, you know, or at least following the course of Seminary Ridge. If he was smart, he'd probably be outside the woods in the darkness so he could make better time. But he's going to pull up out at Longstreet's headquarters, which we don't know physically where Longstreet was. Officially, his headquarters was at a schoolhouse, basically going back toward the Eisenhower farm, back behind the park. Some people speculate he actually spent the night in a now since removed farmhouse near the Longstreet Tower, which I'm sure he took full advantage
He climbed,
while
yeah.
he was there. So regardless, Lee is going to that general area, wherever Longstreet is, and he gets there. This has got to be, you know, probably 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. He pulls up there, and Robert E. Lee with his staff is looking around, and guess what Lee does not see?
Soldiers up.
He doesn't see any movement. Longstreet has made no preparations in order to get this assault going. And up comes Longstreet. And you can imagine, stoic Lee, Longstreet rides up. And this is hard to determine because Longstreet writes 4 different accounts during the war. Excuse me, in the post-war years. He writes 3 articles and a book that reference Gettysburg. And the older he gets, the shakier it becomes, all right? So it's hard. Some of the events in the early articles he ascribes to July 3rd or July 2nd, and later he'll reverse the days on you, you know, and anyway. So anyway, that's the problem with Longstreet. But anyway, according to Longstreet, Lee rides up, Longstreet rides up, and Longstreet instantly hits him with something like, well, General, I've had my scouts out all night, and you have a golden opportunity to move the Confederate Army or move my corps behind those mountains over there and get between the Federals and Washington, D.C. And Lee is sitting there in the saddle, and Lee has already made up his mind at this point. And Longstreet is going to go ahead and put his plan out there. Lee will listen patiently, as was his nature right there. And then at some point, I'm sure there's a lot more to this conversation than Longstreet records, because he doesn't record Lee's answers that well, you know. Lee turns to him, though, beyond a doubt, and in some form or fashion tells Longstreet no, that we're not going to do that. We're not going to be moving around there. Now, I didn't plan on doing this, but it would be a good opportunity, because I'm going to get a question about it anyway, to go ahead and talk about the universal, ubiquitous question of why Lee didn't move between the Federals and Washington, D.C. right out there. So, where was the girl that was yawning a while ago? If I could get you for a second, come on up here and bring that Yankee with you. Send the Yankee too. All right, what about the kid? All right, come up here, Junior Ranger. What many do I need? Up here. All right. Okay, so let's make you, well, let's make you the Union Army. How about that? We won't confuse people. Let's have you stand over here. You're going to be Washington, D.C. I'll go over all this again once I figure it out, all right? And you, y'all related? Yeah. You're the babysitter. So if you think about it, you feeling left out? All right. I like that. You should go stand by the Iron Maiden guy right over here. Look, see, you already have something in common. You can talk about the skull. All right, so if you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, here's the Union Army. Let's make her the Confederate Army, and let's make him Washington, D.C. right here. The general premise is, or the general question is, and what Longstreet is arguing, is that, why don't you come over here and get basically over here behind him. Yeah, face your brother that way. So, if you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, if this is the Union Army, the Confederate Army basically has him surrounded. It's not 360 degrees. But the town of Gettysburg is where I'm standing to make it, and I'm part of the Confederate Army. And you know this, the Union has a fishhook line, and they're basically turned around to defend themselves from the Confederate Army that surrounds them on 3 sides. It's oversimplify matters right here. Longstreet is going to come up and he's going to argue with Lee that they should shift his corps, or he may have argued that they should shift the entire Confederate Army to get between to get between George Meade and Washington, D.C. Now, in order to do that, which I don't know which plan Longstreet is going to advocate with him, but let's take the Confederate Army, for instance. When you talk about shifting this, when people come up to me and ask this question, why Lee didn't do this, and I should say that a lot of this is coming from the movie, too. No, just take a picture. Christmas card. Oh, I forgot Shazam over here. All right, so confident little man. If you think about it, what people fail to realize and we don't know a hard number on this, but one author has estimated that the Confederate wagon train is going to stretch for 45 miles. That's not the infantry and the cavalry or anything else. The wagon train. Now that's not, the wagon train was never 45 miles in length, because the wagon train, there was never one wagon train. There was dozens of wagon trains. But if you were to put them all together, that thing would have measured 45 miles. Now, in addition to that, let me just tell you the problems that Lee would have with this. In addition to that, he holds the town of Gettysburg, which is the axis of all the roads, going north, south, east, and west. His supply line, I might add, tenuous as it is, but he is tethered very loosely to Winchester, Virginia. That's his railhead. If he fights a battle and needs to resupply ammunition, that ammo will be taken by rail to Winchester and then brought up by wagon train to wherever Lee's army is at that point. Let's just say Gettysburg, right here. So he's got that. If he shifts over here, he uncovers Winchester right here. Okay, and the other thing is, point is, Lee, and you all know this, Lee is without cavalry. So if the Union Army is right here, okay, Lee does not know, and he's blind. That's why the Battle of Gettysburg occurs in the first place. He doesn't know. If you look off in that direction, you can apply what I'm saying right here. You see the shadow, the outline of those woods over there in the distance. Robert E. Lee is not a magician. He doesn't know what's on the other side. He doesn't know what's going to be coming up there. All right? That's a problem. To give up the town, to know where the Union Army is. And here's the last thing, which is the hardest thing to predict right here. If you read Robert E. Lee's report, which I don't exactly, I think he's fudging a little bit, you know. But he officially says, his official reason, which most people never catch on to, for fighting the Battle of Gettysburg, is that he could not sustain his army in this area for that long. Logistically speaking, his army did not have enough supplies, and the battle, he would argue, he would say to his boss, President Davis, that the battle in a way was forced upon him, because logistically he could not stay in the area. He either had to attack or he had to withdraw. He could not afford to wait. Now whether you agree with that or not is up to debate, but that's his official reason right here. So let's take the two options here. You could slide the Confederate army around and do the whole thing. Get between Longstreet, slide down on the right, get between, I guess he cut the Taneytown Road and the Emmitsburg Road, and cut the inside route to Washington, D.C. You were talking about, in order to do that, in the face of an enemy, which is in the center of your army, by the way, you're talking about extracting the Confederates over here at Culp's Hill, abandoning the town, which God knows how many wounded you've got in that town right now, and taking the entire Confederate army to the side that we're on right now. All right? When the Confederate army deploys on Seminary Ridge, they would therefore have to slide. All right? They would have to slide. So let's back you up. Let's move the Capitol back here. Where's Shazam? Come on over here. Is it Shazam or Flash Gordon? Flash Gordon, I'm sorry. The, you know, right through here. Give me a little bit of room over there, Greek god. The, if you think about it, Minerva. If you think about it right here, nice chair. If you think about it right here, he would have to slide therefore. Line up by your sister right here. Brain freeze. All right, so the whole, if these are the three Confederate corps, then they would be able to slide. Everybody slide to your right, round through here, and then you can get between Washington and them. The problem for Robert E. Lee is everything that I've told you, though. If Lee slides his army out here, where's he going to resupply from? You're talking about, I guess, changing your base of supplies to what? Where's the railroad going to run to? I think I'd have to check, but I would think his nearest supply line would be Fredericksburg. And that would be tenuous because Northern Virginia is still not occupied by major federal forces, but it does have some in there and could very easily have more just marching out of Washington, D.C. right there. So that's a problem. And once again, without Jeb Stuart here, he could slide that army out there and very well have a Union force come up from Washington. If he's a Union force now coming from Washington, and he is the Army of the Potomac, what do they have Robert E. Lee in? They have him in a vice. They have him in a pincer movement. That's not the easiest thing to do. All right? Go back to your original positions over here. Slide back. All right, right there. If Longstreet is advocating sliding his corps, which may have been what he was doing, over sliding the whole army. If he slides his corps out here, and Lee leaves Ewell over here at Culp's Hill and Hill to expand, stretch on down Seminary Ridge right here, it becomes very tenuous. How does the Confederate Army, if Longstreet moves behind the Round Tops over there, how does the Confederate Army stay connected? It'll be very tenuous. And if Meade wants to change character and make a bold move right here, or with the Round Top standing right here between Longstreet and the rest of the Confederate Army, what if Meade wants to turn and attack Longstreet by himself? Can Longstreet beat off the Union Army? That's the whole problem with that idea. Even if Lee wanted to do it, let's say hypothetically Lee wanted to do what Longstreet advocated, this is not, beyond a doubt, going to turn on a dime. There is a whole lot of logistics involved in trying to move that around. It just is mind-boggling, to say the least. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, all right, do we have in writing anywhere that was Lee's ultimate goal for this move north? I've heard that he was trying to go for Harrisburg, and state capital stuff. But was that his ultimate goal, that he wanted to try the escape?
No, I don't say. Let me rephrase it, because I definitely see where you're coming from. What I'm saying is he doesn't have to capture D.C. by moving. What Longstreet is advocating is with the Confederate Army positions itself between the Union Army and Washington, the Union Army has no choice but to attack. And so, like a matador, that's what Longstreet wants them to do. Come and get us. Hit us one time. Because it's a whole lot easier to fight a defensive battle than it is an offensive battle. And according to Longstreet, that's what Lee agreed to. Not the movement, but before they moved north, Lee agreed to fight an offensive campaign and a defensive battle. That is what Longstreet's claim is. Lee would say in private, never in public, but he would say to his college secretaries that the idea was absurd. That he would never back himself into a corner like that. And say, and plus you got to have a willing enemy. Like Buck Showalter says, the other team has to kind of, play the same game, and that doesn't always happen, so you have to wait to see how events unfold right there. Yes.
What options, he had Longstreet's option, he had the obvious option he picked. Could he have just sit tight for a day or two? And what other options did he have?
Well, he could have sat tight for a few days. I think let me answer it a different way. I think this whole battle, from July 1st when they stumble into each other, I think Robert E. Lee fights it from the viewpoint that the Confederate Army is here. That's all we're getting, and the Union Army is only going to grow stronger. He may not know what's beyond the wood line, but he does know what he's got. He does know what that is, and he knows that the odds are not going to get any better. The longer he stays here, the bigger the Union Army is, and obviously the more time they have to solidify their position. So the object becomes to defeat them before this. I'm not going to sit out here, though, this is not what you asked, sir, but I'm not going to sit out here and try to justify Pickett's charge to you, okay? Because this is just a bad idea. What my objective is to show you the evolution of how he gets to this point, and why he's basically going to do what he does. All right?
He wasn't totally without cavalry. Why didn't he use them Bowden or some of those guys?
Rumble Jones.
Yeah. He had 2,000 cavalry. He could have.
Yes, Stackpole, I believe, which I did an 8th grade report on his book. My God, I look back on that, and no wonder I hated that book report. Right there. Stackpole, if I remember correctly, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a long time. Stackpole advocates that what you're saying, sir, that why didn't the historian Stackpole, why didn't Lee utilize the cavalry which he had? And that's a good point. He did not utilize effectively the cavalry which he had. Stackpole would argue he had sufficient numbers with him. The one thing that Lee does not have, though, is somebody he trusts.
So
And
he
that-
kept his son back from Jim Stewart.
Well, when Stewart rode off, Stewart took the best. And Bowden and Grumble Jones are maybe competent cavalry commanders, but especially Grumble Jones, no doubt in my mind. Stewart leaves him independent because he don't want to deal with him. They don't get along. And so it weakens Lee's hand. But then again, Stewart's not expecting what happened. He's not expecting to get separated either. So, I mean, it all just keeps just snowballs on Lee right there. But going back to it, what Gordon Ray taught me, not about Gettysburg, but about Robert E. Lee, is that Lee, like Lee versus Grant, you would be surprised how many conflicting pieces of information Lee would receive at the same time. Well, we got a feint over here, we got a feint here, this is an attack here, and Lee is a master at hedging those bets right there. But the one thing that Stewart brings to the table is he usually brings him solid information when he comes out. And so he doesn't know these people. He's expecting, I will say, he doesn't know when Stewart's going to show up either. He expected him a week ago. So he's expecting Stewart. I don't think he ever made the adjustment because he didn't think he needed to. And obviously he did.
One more thing. Both flanks of the Union Army being the ground and very hard to attack, did that make him attack in the center? You know, up Culp's Hill was.
Okay, let's answer it this way. All right, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, I appreciate it. A round of applause for the. I'll get her. Just hang on, I'll get her.
If she goes,
If she goes, right? So, all right. So let's answer the gentleman's question this way. Robert E. Lee gets over there. Let's go back to the narrative. He sees Longstreet comes out and advocates, I want to make a turning movement. Lee turns him down in whatever shape, form, or fashion. And then at some point, an hour or two later, there's going to be a pseudo war council in the peach orchard, which most people overlook. But the Confederate generals are going to gather there. A.P. Hill will be there. A lot of staff officers. Charles Venable, who worked for Lee. I want to say Taylor, Marshall were there. Oddly enough, Harry Heath is going to be at this conference. Longstreet will be at this conference. They're going to gather in the peach orchard and they're going to discuss. And if you go to the peach orchard and you look toward the Union position, you can sort of see what they're thinking about. Lee is wanting to make the attack, same attack as July 2nd, augmented by Pickett's division. Whatever happens in this conference, Lee will write, we don't know a lot of the particulars of it, but Lee will write in his official report that at this conference, Longstreet will argue that his quote-unquote, his movements have been embarrassed yesterday by the mountains on his right. So in other words, if Lee attacks the way he wants him to, utilizing the peach orchard to hit him, basically the way I infer, attack where the Pennsylvania Monument is, right there, that the movements, what they were trying to do yesterday, have been embarrassed by the Union holding those mountains. In other words, right here, in other words, if he's the Round Tops and I attack past him, what are the Yankees going to do?
Shoot you in the back.
That's right. They're going to enfilade. They're going to hit me in the flank, and they're going to push them off. He can't do it. In other words, the same thing would happen to him on the third day that happened on the second day. It's at this conference, however shape or form that it happens, that Lee, you could argue he shouldn't have done this. You could argue he should have done this, whatever. But at this conference right here, the decision is made to shift the attack to the north. So in other words, instead of renewing the assault like they did on July 2nd and augmenting that assault, just like they did on July 2nd with men from Hill's Corps, Harry Heath under Pettigrew now and Dorsey Pender now under Isaac Trimble right here, the decision is made to shift the troops to the attack to the north, and Pickett's division still remains in the assault. And now, instead of in a support role, the units from A.P. Hill's Corps are going to be in the main assault. Let me try to put that some shape. They asleep over there? All right, I'll try to shut up. He or she. When he gets bigger, you make sure that you tell him he was on a ranger tour and he was the focal point of it. I didn't even get a wave. Lee is going to shift the focus from July 2nd, repeating that on July 2nd, to starting the attack from right here. Does that make sense? That's the evolution of the plan. That's the evolution of the plan, Washington, D.C. All right, so if you think about it, that's the wrong move to make. What I can answer, and I don't have the answer to, is whether Pickett's division, where it goes historically, we all know that, it's deployed right out here in front of the Virginia Monument, 3 brigades and so forth. I don't know if Pickett's division was supposed to be there in the original attack plan and the position it ends up historically, or that was modified either. Both. I don't know that. I could not find out the answer to that. Another thing that comes out of that conference at the Peach Orchard, which is often overlooked, but it's stated in General Richard Ewell's report, which nobody ever looks at to talk about Pickett's charge. Ewell states, old bald head states, that that he received orders that Longstreet would be ready to attack at 10 o'clock in the morning. And because of that, Ewell is going to be ready to assault at 10 o'clock. This is some of you that went out the mysterious red shirt man tour and everything. We talked about July 3rd and Stewart's brigade, not to be mistaken with Jeb Stuart, but the other Stuart, Maryland Stewart's brigade of infantry is going to make that attack on July 3rd. Well, they attack at 10 o'clock. Well, guess what? Why did the Confederates happen to attack Culp's Hill at 10 o'clock? Because they were expecting the assault to occur over here at 10 o'clock at that point. And I can't answer, ladies and gentlemen, exactly why that did not happen. I don't know.
Well, you hear about all the things they talk about acoustic shadow, where the sound of the cannons wasn't heard, 6 miles away and was heard 60 miles away. They didn't, Longstreet, I don't think, heard the attack on Culp's Hill.
That is definitely plausible. It could have been an acoustic shadow right there. Regardless of whether there was an acoustic shadow or not, Longstreet had to know he had to attack at 10 o'clock. And beyond a doubt, and this is why I studied this question, because I could never figure out, in reading about the Virginians from Pickett's division right over here, it is one of the few times in the American Civil War you ever hear Confederate soldiers write about men throwing up. You just don't see a lot of throw up in the Civil War, puking in the Civil War. They don't record that very often. But what they're talking about and why they record that for the Virginians over here is because a lot of the Virginians were suffering from sunstroke by the time that the attack actually took place, and they're throwing up. That's one of the symptoms of sunstroke. So with that in mind, I could never figure out why Robert E. Lee and Longstreet marched those Virginians out with no shade and lined them up on that ridge line right there and allowed them to lay in the sun for another 5 hours, maybe over that. And a lot of them just couldn't make it. They were just not fit to go forward after that point. The reason that the Virginians are taken out there at 9 o'clock is because they're not expected to stay there that long. That's why they were marched out. But going back to my original question, what is Longstreet doing from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock? What is he doing out there? Lee, I have to say this because I don't want to get too I'm going to pound on Longstreet a lot today. But I don't want to get too far from the point that Robert E. Lee is here personally too. He's on this field. They ride up and down. Longstreet will state after the war that he and the commanding general would ride up in the field multiple times. Confederate soldiers see them riding together. They communicate. They are apart. They are together. They are apart. They are together. It's hard to put it in a chronological order. But as Bill Hewitt, if any of y'all recall doing programs with him, a retired professional military officer once pointed out to me, I will water down Bill's language for this right here. If you're going to, he said in military terms, if you're going to goof off, make sure you goof off in front of the boss. Right? So, Lee is there. And I think, cannot prove this, but I think Lee's disposition fails him here. I think Robert E. Lee is a very kind man that always wants to hear his subordinates out under most circumstances, etc. I think Lee at this point probably needed to put spurs, so to speak, to Longstreet, and it's not within his inner character to do that.
I think he was trying to talk him out of making the charge. That's why he was trying to delay.
Yeah, you know, I could go so far as to call it flat insubordination. Longstreet will say that he is actually, well, I'm not going to do that though. But Longstreet is being stubborn beyond a doubt. And whatever's happening here, which there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of gray area at this time period, whatever's happening is not good. They're, you know, I kind of look at them like a fighting couple. You know, they're still together, but things are tense right now. You know, they're not at the same campsite. One's cooking hot dogs at one site and the other one's eating, you know, pizza downtown. It's like truly weird. All right, so if you think about it, that all rolled into one. Fremantle, Arthur Fremantle, the British observer, will say Longstreet took a nap about noon. Longstreet lays down, takes a nap. And Longstreet's asked about that, and Longstreet said he wasn't sleeping. He was just meditating so he could give the full benefit of his thoughts to the general. The bottom line is, though, it's funny in a way, but and it's sad in another way. I mean, the soldiers are the sad. They're the pawns on the board here. It's sad to say, but Longstreet, beyond a doubt, Longstreet just flat doesn't want to do it. And I'm not going out on a limb saying that. That's his own words. And then those 4 times he records his memoir, he says that all 4 times. I flat didn't want to do it. Never was I so depressed. General, I have been a commander of companies, squads, regiments, brigades, corps, and I am telling you now that no 15,000 men can take that position. What does that sound like? It doesn't sound like self-confidence to me.
Was he depressed about losing his 3 daughters the winter before? That had to be the factor too. Longstreet.
Losing his 3 daughters the winter before, I don't. I know he lost kids. Carlton could tell you the names and the dates and all that. He's the greatest Longstreet fan of all time. And it is true, sir, that Longstreet's demeanor was never the same after he lost all those kids. But I don't know how. I don't know. I wouldn't think it would be impacting here. Longstreet is as Dwight Eisenhower was asked about Longstreet right here, and if Longstreet had thrown the battle, and General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, whatever you want to call it, he liked to be called General. Eisenhower said that Longstreet was too good a soldier to throw this battle. Now you can argue that he should have attacked at 10 o'clock regardless, etc. But he argues he shouldn't have, that he wouldn't have done it intentionally.
What was the excuse that Longstreet used to say why he delayed? What was the official excuse?
He basically said that he was not prepared. He wasn't ready to go forward.
He had the guy sitting up there.
He had the guy sitting out here, what he's preparing for, etc. I think what he desperately wants is, I have no evidence of this, but what I think he desperately wants is Lee to call it off. And he gets to the point where the boss is standing there. And you know this from being married, all right? When the boss is standing there, it's hard to get out, going out and fixing the deck anymore, painting the house, or doing whatever you're procrastinating with, because they're standing there. We'll try to make this gender neutral, all right? So they are standing there. So
Pickett's guys
he'd run out of excuses. Yeah.
Pickett's guys were here at 10 a.m.?
Pickett's guys were
in the night before. And
yeah. When we come back, I've got a few people. We're gonna make this a quick trip as far as the horse trail. Obviously not the tour. We haven't even got 100 yards. And by the way, I'm in charge of the music muster. I'm supposed to go back. Yeah. Hey, we'll just why don't we just have the conclusion over at the band, and we can play, you know, Lorena or Carry Me Back to Old Virginia at the conclusion or something. So that would be cool. What was I going to say? Longstreet out here. He basically runs out of excuses in order not to make this assault, and the poor soldiers have to go forward. Now, whose van is that? Whose car is that over there? There he is, right there. All right, everybody turn around and point at the guy. I see you. I'm a Honda man myself. Oh, I got another story for you. Here's a segue. Transitions. Park Service is all big about transitions. So a couple weeks ago, I came outside my farmhouse, and my twin girls were out there playing in my car. And so I come out and I shoot them out of my car or whatever. But when I got in there, I didn't drive it that day, and I got in there the next day, the seat was down all the way back. I got power seat, I got leather in this car. All right, so slick leather, nice, that's how I roll. So I get in the car the next day, the seat's all the way down. I get in the car, I ready to put my power seat back into position, and it don't work anymore. So what I think happened was, one was sitting on the headrest and the other one was operating the buttons, and they were giving each other rides on the seat. What they did was burn my motor out. So that's a problem on two fronts. One, my seat is locked in the reclining position. Number two, if you drive a 2002 Honda Accord EX, they don't make that part no more.
Oh, God.
So I don't know if you noticed, when I drove up, I was low riding when I pulled up at the program here. So I had to get Mama, bless her heart, my grandma's blanket out, which nobody's burned yet. So I got grandma's blanket out right there, and I got a pellet to stuff me up on the underside of that. And I had to go down to Fredericksburg to speak last week. I drove 300 miles round trip riding on that pillow right there. I pull up, everybody's glad to see me, and they're all just looking at me. I drive by that big old pillow right there. So if any of you happen to know or run a cutting torch or happen to know where a junkyard is, I am open to all ideas, because that's what I'm going to be doing on Monday. But I gotta get that seat up somehow. That's the plight I'm in right now. Yes. Oh, you
Transition?
know.
No, transition.
Oh.
Transition. Speaking of character and everything, how sick was Lee at the moment that he was putzing around down here?
Well, that would probably factor in. The question is, how sick was Lee, and how did it factor into his abilities? I don't make excuses for Robert E. Lee based on his health, and there's no doubt that he's not feeling well. And we'll get to the end of that. I'll give you an example, the best example we have of that at the end of the program. But suffice it to say, Robert E. Lee is not. I cannot think of anything in the end that Lee does on this battlefield that is uncharacteristic of Robert E. Lee.
Okay.
And Pickett's charge is pure Bobby Lee. If Lee runs out of options, then he'd smash him in the mouth right there. Right. He'd hit him right in the gut. And that's Malvern Hill, that's here. It's the wilderness. He's just an uber aggressive general.
Cost him a few soldiers doing that.
It is a very costly philosophy, to say the least. But what he's trying to do overall, every battle, ideally, he doesn't do this every battle, but Lee always wants to hold the initiative. And the way you hold the initiative is through the offensive. That's why he wouldn't fit really in the Longstreet's plan. He never liked to sit back and wait. But Longstreet really liked Fredericksburg, where Lee sat back and waited on him. But the Union had no choice, really. They could only go that way or they could go backwards. That's not most Civil War battlefields. Any others? So what we're going to do, we have a pretty day, and like I said, it's a little humid, but not too bad. Not like July 3rd, huh? So what we're going to do is we're going to walk. You've already gone through one page? Or just wrote that little, I can't tell. Poker face, I like this. I don't have sunglasses though. We're going to walk down the road. Please keep to the right. Once we clear the cars, the parked cars will have a lot more room to maneuver. The cars can get around you. But we're gonna take our time. We're gonna make our way up to the North Carolina Monument, and we're gonna talk about the actual bombardment, and we're gonna talk about the actual deployment of the troops. How Lee set up and Longstreet set up the formation of the troops. How it was done. How it might have been done better. All right. So we'll all meet. We'll get strung out, but we'll all meet at the North Carolina.
You need some water?
One
You need
quick
some water?
question.
Oh, that'd be. Yeah, go
Are
ahead,
the
man.
North Carolina still mad because they figured there was more of them than the Virginians and it shouldn't be named Pickett's charge?
Yeah, the Pickett Pettigrew Trimble charge.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
When you're his age, I'll carry one for you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Matt, I would have offered you water, but I know how much you distrust Northern Ohioans, so with that said. So I got started now.
Matt, that's the first I've seen you drink water on the tour.
Oh, that's
He's not
nice.
as
I like
pure
that.
as you thought he was.
I believe it was Kemper. Was it Kemper? One of Kemper's staff officers wrote on July 3rd, they were sitting down there at the Sherfy farm before the attack started, and they were drinking, they were drawing water out of the well at the Sherfy farm, and that Confederate after the war remembered that he could still remember it was very palatable, and that only with whiskey. You could wash it down. The area here is hard water, if y'all know what I mean. So I know what he was talking about. Don't ever try to have a clean toilet in Gettysburg, right? Oh, like, yeah. Limestone, that's it, limestone. Yeah. What are you eating?
Nothing.
Not Swedish, but goldfish. Like the cracker type. I like the Swedish fish. Jen tried those. Oh, yeah. gone? I thought I had some crawling.
You did.
I live in this old farmhouse. You just get used to it. Yeah, something is attacking me. What could it be? All right, what are we going to talk about here? All right, one of the things, if you're into trivia, right here, one of the things that if you may or may not be surprised by, really has no bearing, but when they choose to make the assault, when they choose to make the support troops part of the main assault right here, Pender's division under Isaac Trimble, the two brigades, Scales and Lane, which are going to be Lawrence and Lane, which are going to be part of this assault right here, are actually located up by the, probably somewhere around the modern National Guard Armory or the Seminary, somewhere in that general area, or maybe both. When they choose to move the assault, Pender's brigades are going to have to move by the right flank. Remember, they would be facing this way. They'd have to move by the right flank down through here and go into position. That was about 3/4 of a mile. One of the strange things is that when they pick out Scales and Lane, and this starts into, you know, who they picked and why they picked them, or if there's even a reason they picked them. You know, they're not cherry picking the troops for freshness. You've got, for instance, you've got Thomas's brigade of Georgians, who were unengaged on the first day and have been unengaged during the entire battle and are part of Pender's division, and they don't choose them. I think Thomas's brigade the whole brigade comes out of this fight with less than 100 casualties, which is not to diminish it, but that's awful low for the Battle of Gettysburg. Why didn't they not pick them? I don't know. Maybe they just don't like they don't trust Thomas or something. But if you go back to the Battle of Fredericksburg, he's, you know, I don't see anything in the record. Now, Robert E. Lee is going to ride out at some point along the artillery line running from the Peach Orchard to Spangler's Woods. That is where we were over here at the Virginia Monument, angling over toward the Peach Orchard. He would see Major James Deering, commander of an artillery battery or battalion, in range of the enemy, and he ordered him to retire, saying, "I do not approve of young officers needlessly exposing themselves. Their place is with their batteries." James Deering had one arm, and he's out riding in front of his guns, strutting for the Union, I'm sure, on horseback. At least twice, Lee is going to ride the entire length of the line with Longstreet, and then he's going to ride it by himself. By the time, and this is being generous, the preparations were complete, the morning was gone. In the midst of all this, if you were standing here on July 3rd, what's his name? Lorenzo. Lorenzo the baby. All right. You didn't name him Matt? It's going to be hard to see for those of you around these cedar trees, but if you look out there, you see those dark trees, dark green bushes out there, maybe trees in that area. That's the Bliss Farm location. If you can imagine, in the midst of July 3rd, they're actually going to be out here and skirmishing, and as Lee is riding along through here, I'm not going to say he's physically here at the exact time, but during this time period, Union skirmishers get out there and fire the house and the barn. And so you've got, they burn their own, so they set that on fire, which they were very experienced at doing. And so, you know, the smoke is drifting. Nobody liked that joke. The smoke is drifting across the field right through here as the house burns down. Midst of all this. Okay, so at the end of all these preparations, Lee had somewhere between roughly around 147 cannon prepared for a general bombardment on the Union lines. Out of the guns, he had out of 83 guns in the First Corps, he had 75 of those guns deployed from the Peach Orchard, running north to basically the Virginia Monument. That's 1,300 yards for 75 guns. Each gun, somebody's going to have to do this, well, on paper. I can't do it in my head. But according to the manual, each gun is supposed to be 14 yards apart. That's where the park is misleading, the War Department, the way they set them up. They're obviously not 70, they're obviously closer together. Some guns in Longstreet line were only 650 yards from the enemy. Hill's guns in this area lined Seminary Ridge and at some points were 1,400 yards to the Union position from their target. One battalion remained in reserve because of no room. Roughly 147 guns were available for the assault. There was no coordination though, at least none that we can get. This is where Robert E. Lee is missing somebody called Henry Hunt. Henry Hunt, if you don't know, is the Union counterpart on the other side, who's the artillery chief. And Henry Hunt is a great organizer. He gets the teams to, most of the time, gets the teams to pull together. Over here, the equivalent of Henry Hunt is a guy by the name of Pendleton. William N. Pendleton, who is a West Point graduate, but he is an Episcopal minister. He leaves the service to call because the Lord calls him. And he's from Lexington. Hence the name, his first artillery battery. Let me know if I'm talking too fast. Hence the artillery battery, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Which guns, those guns are now on the parade ground of VMI. The Rockbridge Artillery. That's Pendleton's original battery. Oh, where else? This is not even written down. Where else can you get this stuff? Okay? So Pendleton he's just not as good as Hunt. How can I put it any plainer? And what we have here is A.P. Hill's guns, which are half the Confederate artillery, and you got Longstreet's guns, which is the other half, and he's got to be the one that coordinates everything. Well, at least Alexander, or Longstreet's artillery commander, never talks about talking to Hill's men. In fact, he writes in his memoirs that when the Federals got out here, that Hill's artillery opens up about 10 o'clock in the morning and waste for about 10 to 15 minutes, waste a lot of ammunition shooting back and forth. Now, Alexander thinks it's because of the skirmishers at the Bliss Farm, but could it be, Bill Hewitt taught me this, could it be that Hill's guns are opening up in anticipation of the 10 o'clock assault? I don't know. Could be either. Right there. You're really liking this, aren't you? You're just eating this off.
As the Second Corps Artillery Commander talked about having his artillery battery stop firing at the Confederates around 10:15, 10:30, because they're doing cannon battery. So that could be part of it too.
Yeah, could be. And that will be a telltale sign where they're shooting. Yeah. Are they shooting at the Bliss Farm, or are they shooting at Cemetery Ridge? I didn't know that. Thank you. Yeah. Keep in mind too, put this in the back of your mind, that Alexander is going to put in reserve 9 howitzers, which is a type of cannon. We don't need to go into all the details, but it's a shorter cannon for those people texting in the back. All right, it won't reach as far. Okay, so a howitzer is basically with a shorter range, with a shorter barrel, I should say. Let's say this is my target right here. Let's shoot him. What it does is a howitzer, we use Dave. All right, as a howitzer with the shorter barrel will give you a bigger arc over a shorter area. So if he is earthworks and somebody's standing behind him right here, then you obviously don't want to shoot straight. You want an arc. You know, so you can lob them in there, right there. The problem with them is they won't go as far in total distance. So in other words, long story short, they're not good enough to hit the Union line. They just won't throw a shell that far. So Alexander puts them in reserve in anticipation of supporting, and this is what people miss about Pickett's charge, in anticipation of supporting the infantry as they go forward out through there. And unfortunately, they're going to be lost by the time they get out here. All right. Any questions?
Was there any mortars out here? I heard there was, but they weren't used.
I wouldn't give you 100% no, but I can tell you I've never read that either.
Okay.
Now, well, God only knows what they got in the wagon train back over
All
there.
the captured armament.
They couldn't. The short answer is those short little coal-horn mortars. They couldn't throw a ball 1,400 yards.
So was it anticipated to move after the cannonade was over and the troops started moving toward the Union line? Was it anticipated to move the cannon forward to support the troops that were moving forward, and there just wasn't enough ammunition left to do that?
Right. So let me set the troops up. I agree with what you're saying. Let me set the troops up so they can better illustrate it. Get my maps out, actually. Let me see what I got here. All right, so sometimes I impress myself. Have these handy dandy maps that you can see I spent an awful amount of time on right here. Yes, you like it? Mm-hmm. All right, so hold this. All right, what we're going to do then is we're going to do the human chain. We'll talk about the artillery and its significance up here. Where'd all them kids go? He awake? He's awake. All right.
Back there.
Okay, come on up. Where's Flash? Good. I needed reinforcement. Hold on to brother for dear life. All right, so what ends up happening? We're going to put you, why don't you, since you want to be with brother, you get on this one because you're going to be the small, you go with him. He's going to go with you. You're going to be Brockenbro. He's pretty small. All right, so you go over here. We're going to line up a straight line. I hadn't told y'all what I wanted. My fault. You line up right here, and you line up right here. Okay, and then we're going to put you two right here. Then we'll put you two. We're just going to form a straight line right here. And we'll put another straight line right here. And then we're going to put you over here, back over here in that area. And now you got Pettigrew and you got Trimble's brigades. All right, so you got 4 brigades lined up through here. This is going to be Brockenbro. This is going to be, you never heard of these before, Joe Davis. Thank you very much. This is going to be
Marshall.
Marshall, right here. North Carolinians. This is Pettigrew's former brigade. And on the end over here, the turncoat, Benedict Arnold,
Fry.
is going to be Fry, who used to be Archer, right here.
See, I got a cheat sheet.
Man, I know. So, back here behind them, you have Lawrence and Lane, or Lane and Lawrence. Which one is it?
Well, we got Lane on the left, Lawrence on the right.
Lane's on the left, Lawrence on the right. Okay, so this is Pender's old division, now under Trimble. All right, if you look at this, take one step out, right over here. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Now you look at that. We'll get to Pickett in a minute. You look at that right there. What's the problem with that?
Too young.
That is a problem. They are too young. That's right. Where's the weakness in the line? On your right, but the Confederate left. Yes. Okay. Yes, there is nobody behind. Right here. In other words, there are no supporting units right here. And if you look at it, you have the two, arguably one of the two weakest brigades in the entire Confederate Army shoring up the left flank. Right here. There's no support. What you end up having out here, if I run out of kids, I may have run out of kids. I may have to get goldfish. Stark Industries. No more kids. Nobody wants to send me your children. All right, let's go on out here. All right, you're gonna bring him. I need 3 for this. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, there's another one. There you go. Oh, even go sacrifice? No, not go sacrifice your daughter.
Well, we need Wilcox and
yeah, we're gonna need Wilcox and Lane. Stand behind me. Y'all, brother.
Yep.
Okay. So now you add in Pickett, who are fresh, big brigades. All right. So if you look at it right out here, who's the youngest? Hey. You. All right, so you must be. Who's oldest? Him. You. No. You. No. You. She's 2? 3. Okay. All right. So she's 3. How did 4 get here? That's an interesting question. We'll talk about that. So, if you think about it, you'll understand one day. If you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, these 3 boys are Pickett's division. The weight of the Confederate attack is right here on the right. If you look at it, the weakness of the Confederate attack is going to be on the flanks once again. Because if you look at this, right here, there is nobody behind him. This is Kemper's brigade. I should have done this. This is Garnett's brigade, and this is Armistead's brigade. All right? So we'll do it again real fast. This is Fry. This is Marshall. This is Davis. This is Brockenbrough right there. And this is Lane, and this is Lawrence right over here. Okay. Confederate attack plan. We don't have any written evidence that A.P. Hill was involved in the planning of this attack. We also don't have any written evidence that Longstreet was involved in this. I don't know. In other words, somebody set these troops up. I don't know who. I could argue either one. There is a problem. If you will go back to the visitor center after this, when there's a mad rush and we finally all go back to see the Civil War music muster, which goes on. There will actually be 2 programs tonight at the Pennsylvania Memorial if you happen to be around too, which will be pretty cool. It's 6 and 7 unless it's raining right here. When we all rush back to get the seminar booklet before we go out to see the bands that are outside, you will find an article in there about A.P. Hill. And you will know that always this blows me away at the short amount of time that is transpiring between these battles. I think it's because it takes us so long to learn about a battle, we think that there's that much bigger a time period between the battles than there actually is. Less than a year earlier, is my point, Longstreet had placed A.P. Hill under arrest outside of Richmond. Now, it didn't go very far. It didn't get to the point of a court-martial or whatever. Lee swept it under the rug, transferred Hill under Stonewall Jackson. That'll fix it right there. See how that worked out. And Jackson promptly puts him under arrest. And a few months later, poor Hill, he's had a temper. But I don't know. I do not know this. But is there any residual effect? And is there any animosity still between Hill and Longstreet? We know that they were, at least on the surface, cordial. Were they inviting one another to each other's headquarters in the wintertime? No. All right. What is happening here? How much? The bottom line is, how much coordination is going on between Hill and Longstreet? It begs the fundamental question, which I don't have an answer to this question. When did? Let me start here. A.P. Hill, out of all of his brigades right here, let me count here. He has Basically, Lee gives Longstreet 2/3 of his corps. Almost 3/4 of his corps goes to Longstreet. How would you feel if you're A.P. Hill?
Pissed off.
It begs the second question, when did Lee, and these are the little things that get in the way, but when you get into military jargon, provenance, seniority, whatever you want to call it, when did Robert E. Lee physically give A.P. Hill command of those troops? I mean, Longstreet command of those troops from A.P. Hill. Does Lee consider, in other words, these troops to be under the command of Longstreet from 9 o'clock in the morning, or is it only when the assault begins? If that is true, could it be that Hill felt that Longstreet was in complete control of it and he didn't need to meddle in it, or could it be that Longstreet felt that Hill was in control of it and he didn't need to meddle in it? Right there. And then you get all these, you know, it's like a couple not communicating. All right? When the husband wanders off to the other side of the tree, stands by himself. If you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, who is coordinating this assault? If you want to get into the actual, how it actually is going to unfold, the actual execution of Pickett's charge is not as pretty as we dreamed it of. I can't tell you how many times when I was a kid in Houston, Mississippi, with the Meet Robert E. Lee reader, how many times I would march across that pasture to pierce the Union line. And you know, Robert E. Lee, I still got the book somewhere, if I ever unpack all that stuff. It'll come out of there, but Robert E. Lee, according to the Meet Robert E. Lee reader, rode along the line, and the Confederate soldiers were ordered not to cheer, so they took their hats off. What's his middle name?
Louis?
Who?
Louis?
Louis. Not Lee? It's just getting worse. All right. At least you didn't name him Sue. If you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, Robert E. Lee is going to ride along through here. And he's got to be able to see it. I used to think when I was a kid that Lee had complete control of this assault and that everything went off without a flaw. That's not true. How it actually happened, if you want to look at the battlefield, if you look right over here, ladies and gentlemen, the battlefield will teach you a lot of things. That first rise which you see, I mean the one directly in front of you over there, that first rise, ladies and gentlemen, is where the front line, these two gentlemen right here, Kemper and Garnett, are going to be positioned. That was the one thing that blew me away when I first got here to Gettysburg and started learning about Pickett's charge. I thought everybody started from the wood line. That's not true. The two front brigades of Pickett's division are actually extended out in front. So if you want to get a true picture of it right here, the true picture is the right flank is roughly 800 yards from the Union position, and the left flank, or Pettigrew's division, is only 1,400 yards from the Union position, give or take, out here. That's a problem. All right? It's not as coordinated, and there doesn't seem to be. We go through the artillery bombardment, okay? Boom, boom, boom. The artillery bombardment, as we all know, did not work. It does not knock out the Union artillery. And Longstreet is sitting over there, ladies and gentlemen. He is sitting over there, and he is facilitating on what he should do. And that bombardment, when it does not succeed, he is still looking for an excuse. Look at Alexander's writing right there. What does Longstreet do? You will advise General Pickett when the time has come for him to advance. And that lieutenant colonel, if you know military jargon, the lieutenant colonel of artillery is just flabbergasted that a lieutenant general has just given him the authority to order forward an assault that will decide the fate of the Republic. And he's like, well, you know, if you, this is before the bombardment, he writes Longstreet, he says, well, hey, you got a better idea, boss. You best tell me before we open these guns up, because we don't have ammo except for one attempt. And Longstreet puts it back on him. And Alexander says, I'll do my best, sir. I'll do the best I can. Alexander is not seeing anything to give him hope. The Union guns are still firing. And Alexander finally writes a note to Pickett. He sends a note and he says, Union guns still firing, something like that. Please, if you're going to come forward, best be thinking about that. He picks up his binoculars. He's looking at the copse of trees. He sees through the smoke, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's Brown's battery, don't quote me, but one Union battery is withdrawing from the copse of trees. By darn, he thinks to himself, if they don't replace it, here's our chance. And he keeps his binoculars fixed on there. And after a minute or two, they don't come back. And he says, by God, he writes another note. If you ever go to the Library of Congress, this is your country's history in a nutshell. If you ever go to the Library of Congress, I stumbled up on these one time inadvertently trying to research Vicksburg. They bring out the whole box of whatever documents, and they could be miscellaneous documents. I mean, what I'm saying, from several different people you didn't order. But I picked them up, and it was Alexander's papers. Wow. And in the Library of Congress, they're on these little bitty sheets of paper. And the cool thing about it, ladies and gentlemen, is that Alexander's sitting in the saddle when he's writing this, and his hand is shaky. And you can see from the concussions from the artillery going off and his horse moving on him that he's having a hard time writing right here. But there's that original note in my hand right there to General Pickett saying, for enemy guns withdrawing from the cemetery, for God's sake come forward quick or my guns can't support you. That's the note right there, and I'm holding it. Meanwhile, the staff about 20 yards away is nonchalantly doing this. No, they didn't do that.
Did you steal the note?
No, but I do have a copy of Pickett's lost report right here. Let me unfold it for you.
So was it a coincidence, or you think Hunt was baiting them by taking the artillery off?
This is better than a movie. You coming out from behind it disappears like a leprechaun. What was the question?
You think it was just coincidence, or Hunt was baiting them by taking his batteries off to refit?
I think it was coincidence that battery withdrew. I think the battery ran out of ammo, and I think even though the Confederate bombardment's ineffective, I think the blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, and they ended up, even though they were missing a lot, they ended up hurting very badly that Union artillery up in the center of the line. Cushing, Brown, there's another one in there too.
Arnold was hit hard, Woody was hit hard.
If you don't get to be a guide, it's just gonna be yeah, and it gets to be that. He comes riding up. Let me return the narrative. Pickett comes riding up to Longstreet, and here's the fatal moment. Longstreet's leaning against that fence, you know. I won't sit down for you, but he's leaning against that fence rail right there. He's got his leg propped up and everything, and he's, you know, bombardment. The Confederates are running out of ammo, and Pickett comes up, and he salutes him. He says, "General, shall I advance?" And Longstreet doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything. Why didn't he say anything? It's not a trick question. Why didn't he say anything? He didn't want to do it.
He was convinced what was going to happen.
He didn't want to do it. You don't want to do it. You ever had anything in your life you don't want to do? And you got to do it? You know, it's just, I fired one guy in my life, and I did such a poor job, he showed up the next day. That's a true story. I had to fire him again. You never had that problem. So if you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, there is if you go and look up that article I talked about earlier about Pickett's charge, I found a rare account, and it may not be true, okay, because it's not direct from the source. But I got a copy of a newspaper article from New Orleans, or maybe it was the Times-Picayune or something like that. And the guy talked about it's third-hand information, but he claimed to have talked to George Pickett about that moment after the war, and Pickett said that it didn't go down like Longstreet said it did. According to this guy's third-hand information, he said that Longstreet, he stood there. Pickett says that he stood there for a few moments. According to this account, Longstreet didn't say anything, so he rode off and came back a few minutes later and repeated it again to Longstreet. General, shall I advance? And that Longstreet just couldn't. It sort of happened. It's just, what I'm saying is, it took a lot longer to get an answer out of Longstreet than I think Longstreet is saying in his memoirs right there. Did y'all want to know all this? So Longstreet finally nods. I think that's true. And he tells Pickett, and Pickett, it is true, was totally had an opposite feeling about this attack than Longstreet did. And Pickett goes riding out. Dun, 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 dun. And he goes dashing down the line, you know, with those golden locks, brown locks, screaming at his men, "Up men into your posts, and let no man forget today that he is from old Virginia." And it's time for the Confederates to go forward. Now, in the midst of all this, a new brigade was inserted into the Confederate battle line. All right? An unknown Confederate brigade, who we must determine later who exactly that was. But between Pickett, nobody thought that was funny. I thought it was funny. Once again, he's forward. This is where it all starts to fall apart. This is where it all, from the very beginning, you could say it never had a chance. It's a wonder they ever got up there. Let me put it to you that way. Never rent a mini go-kart to a bunch of teenagers. That would be rule number one. Okay? Do you happen to know the difference between a rental and a four-wheel drive? The difference between a rental and a four-wheel drive is you won't take that four-wheel drive anywhere. Alright, so they'll explain that one to you too. So that's funny. Now come on. If you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, Longstreet is going to order Pickett forward first. 800 yards, 1,400 yards. There is no pre-given signal for the assault. And so what ends up happening, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, is the people that have the shortest distance to go are going to be the first to move, instead of the people that have the longest distance to go being the first to move. I might also add, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the effects right over here, if you look at the terrain, obviously this whole ridge line is covered with artillery. The Confederate infantry has to get through all this stuff and reform their ranks on the other side of these trees. That takes time. The Virginians over here don't have any of those impediments. They're already moving forward. Another thing, let's get even deeper into this thing. As Pickett rides away from the Virginia Memorial, the first people he runs across are Garnett's brigade and Armistead's brigade. He didn't ride all the way down here to this gentleman to the far end of the line and get him going first. So by the time what ends up happening is that Garnett goes forward and Armistead goes forward. And Kemper is just now getting the word. Well, they're already moving on him. And Kemper's got to conform on the ground to the situation that's already falling apart on him. Step over here. Give me a little room. So what Kemper does is he faces by the left flank. He marches, he utilizes, I don't know if you can see it very well, but along the Emmitsburg Road up there, basically the road is on top of ridge lines. And he utilizes the Confederate side of the ridge line to shelter his troops as he marches at right angles to try to link up with Garnett, who is moving away from him right through here. So that's a problem as it's going on. So you've got all this working out here, and it's not good. Are we friends now? No? Okay. So, you've been very patient. I appreciate that. Then you got this. You got this right here. And I referred to this on the anniversary, but we're standing on it. Look at what we're standing on. Look at this. This is not very large, all right? But look how the ground slopes off to your right. Look how it slopes off on the other side to your left. These two brigades right here, Davis and Brockenbrough, cannot see what these two brigades are doing. Okay? Because look, you can't see. Now that's easy for me to say, but they didn't realize that. So look at it from their vantage point. The Tennesseans, Alabamians, and North Carolinians are watching over there. You get the same sight they did. They're watching Pickett move out. Hey, it's time to go. So what ends up happening, ladies and gentlemen, instead of everybody moving once over here, only you two going to step forward. You step forward right out here, and guess what? These two have yet to move. So now you've already lost, what did you have there? 9 brigades. You've only got, what, 5 moving forward so far, right here. And courier's going to be sent. You've got a brand new division commander over here, Pettigrew. He's a brilliant guy. He's a mathematician from UNC, North Carolina. Not a you know, dummy by any stretch of the imagination, but he doesn't have any experience doing this stuff. Now you could argue that all he had to do was go straight forward, but that's easier said than done too. If everybody goes straight forward, then guess what? Gaps start opening up. You got to keep this whole thing aligned as it's going forward. And guess what? As they're going forward, what happened to the alignment here? Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. No, you're right. I'm wrong. I'm wrong. No. You're right where you did. I forgot where I put it. I apologize. With this alignment going on, at some point, and I mean literally when they're stepping off, if this story can get any better, literally when they're stepping off, ladies and gentlemen, they decide that Burkett Fry right here is going to be the Brigade of Direction. That's spelled F-R-Y. All right? Burkett Fry is going to be the Brigade of Direction right here. So what does that mean? That means that everybody over here and over here are going to guide on him. In other words, they're going to guide center. Everybody. That's how you keep everybody aligned. And if you look, don't have any evidence for this either, but there is a fence. You've never believed this. There is a fence that runs at right angles to the Union position that takes you directly up toward the angle. That fence is over there. You can see it right there. And guess what? Fry's brigade happens to be aligned on that fence right there. So that gives them a straight shot. That aligns the rest of the Confederate command on the side of it right here, but it also leads to other unforeseen problems. The original orders were, and James Kemper talks about this since he survives the battle, was to guide right, to guide upon him. In other words, he goes straight forward and everybody else shifts over him to him. When they guide center on him, that throws everything off. Instead of the Confederate force moving this way to the south, the Confederate force is moving in this way. And what's supposed to happen is, if you're guiding right, let's go back to our original position. Back there, yeah, we put the 2 back there, etc. Look at how it's aligned. 2 brigades with Armistead behind, Stark Industries over here. All right? Stark Industries. So, if you align right, guess what's going to happen? When you align right, you come forward and then come past your brother. You don't move. Right back there. Guess what happens? It opens up a gap. All right? And now you come forward. Look where Armistead goes. Okay? All right? And then you just close it off. If everybody's guiding right, you close it off. You got one wall. But it makes the Confederate line go further south. Let's say roughly almost to the Pennsylvania border, where they would have ended up. And you all know how the attack ends. So you know how that's going to work. So let's go back to our original positions right over here. What ends up happening when he moves forward first, then Armistead moves forward, then he's moving by the right flank, and then Fry, everybody starts guiding over him, here on him, is that Armistead, raise your arm right there, Armistead is blocked. He can't get to where he was supposed to be. All of this is happening on the fly. Okay, it's falling apart on him. And there's nothing they can do because this machine is in motion right here. So Pettigrew sends his aide, Captain Young, over here to find Davis and Brockenbrough. He has brought back information that Brockenbrough right here, raise your hand, Brockenbrough is not coming forward. You know what Pettigrew says? Never mind, doesn't matter anyway. Didn't have much faith in them. They weren't very good troops and they didn't like their commanders anyway. A lot of them were converted heavy artillerymen. They didn't want to be infantry. And they definitely didn't want to be in this. This is not what they foresaw. They liked to be down on the James River. At Drury's Bluff, eating shad. All right, so Davis Brigade comes forward. You two step forward. And basically what it is step behind your brother right here. Basically, give me a little bit more steps right here. Is the left end of the line droops. Is hanging in the air right here. Brockenbrough never gets going. The girl in pink, I see you over there. You're cute as a button. As long as you beat the Nationals, I like that hat. It droops on the left over here, okay? And it ends up, Davis Brigade never connects, and the attack goes forward with basically, what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 brigades. If you want to get really deep out in the woods, you've got over here where One Nation is, the man with the great map right over here, he's going to be Wilcox and Lang. And they're supposed to shore up the flank of Pickett's charge. You've got the notes.
I do.
Oh, you got the notes. He's got the notes right here, and this is how it's supposedly how it ends up. Lang and Wilcox, you just need to see these marks down here, are supposed to be supporting the right flank of the Confederate line right there. Oh, you got competition. Look, everybody, pan over here. It's the mysterious red shirt man from YouTube. What ends up happening, ladies and gentlemen, what ends up happening is the attack falls apart. Now you could argue, let's get into hypotheticals, that you could, everybody go back to your original position, if you can remember that. All right, very good. What ends up happening, I should finish this off. I should have finished this off. But if you look at Lawrence and Lane right over here, when they come forward, they're too late. Confederate artillerymen talk about when Pender's or Trimble's brigades come forward, these two in the back row, these artillerymen in this area talk about it's the only time they heard the Confederate soldiers talking, like they were going to lose. They would get to the tree line and they would look out across this field and they would whisper to each other, they would talk to each other. This is Malvern Hill all over again. There's no way we can do this. And they went forward like that, not thinking that they were going to have any success. They also said that the Confederates, the front line, these gentlemen advancing right here, were probably 700 to 800 yards already out in the field by the time these two get going. They need to be up on each other. So when she melts away, step right over there, he won't go far, and he starts getting hammered right here. That blunt, look where all the mass of your troops are right here. She has to be diverted. Instead of going straight up the center, Lane is taken over here and diverted to the left to try to shore up that flank, and he's too late by the time he gets there. There are so many Confederates fleeing from Davis and Brockenbrough's brigade that she actually has to fix bayonets to keep the fleeing Confederate soldiers from breaking through, because they're tearing through the ranks, they're running through them, you know, and you can't keep your alignment, and they're scaring the rest of the soldiers. So you fix bayonets and you make them go around you right there, and you maintain your alignment, kind of like a riot, if you will. But anyway, you take away that brigade. The bottom line is, it's a wonderment that they ever got there. It is a true testament to the especially the brigade commanders that they were able to pull it off to get it up there. And watching this, ladies and gentlemen, is Robert E. Lee and James Longstreet. And you could argue, we could spend out here arguing where it went wrong, if there was one thing, etc. But they get up there, and for 45 minutes, Lee is watching this debacle happen right here, and it's just, they're just getting slaughtered. I mean, you can see them getting shot up there. How'd you like to have that? Any questions? Yes.
Gaps.
Minerva.
Yes. If I were walking, I wouldn't mind a gap so the cannonball could go here rather than there. Why so packed?
Well, first of all, they aren't going to shoot for the gaps. They'll shoot for the mass. As far as like what I think you're saying, the battle line being a little bit further, the reason for that is because you can deliver mass firepower once you get there. If you extend your line, you would actually, it's discipline. If you jam everybody together, you know, they can't go anywhere. And if you put gaps in them right here, if you lose this person right here, if you had a gap and now you got this gap in between, it's almost impossible to keep it right here.
Why not get rid of the fences along the Emmett Road so they wouldn't have to climb over the fences?
They would try to get rid of them, they couldn't break them down. There were places that they did. That is a misnomer that they didn't get some of the fences down. But the problem with getting the fences down is that the rebels, once they hit the Emmetsburg Road, they're faced with two choices. You can either climb it or you can go through the gap in the fence. And if you go through the gap in the fence, it's like pouring sand through an hourglass, right? And all the Confederates collect at that gap right there. And what are those Union artillerymen doing? They want the biggest return for their bang. So they're concentrating on those rebels right there. And so that's a very deadly place to be. I'll tell you something to show you how I'm learning. Still, I had a guy teach me something yesterday, a reenactor artilleryman. He said they went out and they fired live canister, which would have been what the Union artillery would have been firing on Pickett's charge that day. And he said that with single canister shot, that the balls went higher over a shorter distance. But if you put in double canister, that the weight of the shot actually sunk it, and the balls they were shooting at, you know, cardboard or whatever. But this is the interesting thing. He said they had the guns lined up 14 yards apart. And when you fired canister, which is a tin can full of little lead balls right there, he said that the opposing infantry line had to be further than 300 yards to get 100% saturation. If the infantry was going back to your question, sir, if the infantry was within less than 300 yards and your guns were shooting 14 yards apart, there's actually gaps within your coverage because the canister doesn't spread as far, as wide is a better word, as it needs to be. So you could actually you could march through that and be, I'm not saying I tried, but you could be in a safe zone back there. Does that make sense? You have to kind of draw it out, but you could get,
easy.
you know,
That's easy. Simple amount.
you could get in a safe zone.
So that can explain why, when they got close, they were able.
That's
The
because
guys
some of them actually got there alive. Yeah.
The guys that started out were in worse exposure than the guys that actually were close. Well, they had the rifle fire and stuff.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's when the bloodbath really began.
Matt? I don't know if it's argument or rumor, but I remember always hearing that when they fired back and forth, they had the older style cannon that created a lot of cloud, smoke. You couldn't see anything. We always heard rumor that the Unions realized, you know, we don't know if we're hitting them. They don't know if they're hitting us. Let's just try something. Let's just stop firing for a while and give them the illusion that they hit us. Did that happen, and did that have any influence on when they decided let's start the march?
I wouldn't put it like the illusion of hitting us. basically you cease firing and you draw your enemy out.
Right. That did that hold
That's
true?
twofold. The one is the first, like I just said. The other one is they're running out of ammo too.
Then
The Union has actually run out of ammo and they have to do
Yeah.
it.
So they had to
If
reserve.
you will pan to your left, the mysterious red shirt man wishes to speak.
I'll add 2 cents into this. When we talk about Brockenberg's brigade, and I don't have the numbers in my head, but at Chancellorsville he lost over 600 men. All right, so even before they get here, they're just demoralized. Also, when we look at the guns over here, and we can see the White House, the Bryan barn, to the left are bronze guns, and their canister range is 400 yards. To the right are iron guns, and their canister range is 200 yards. So the left is going to be hit by some 39 guns on Cemetery Hill, right behind the houses, before the rest of the lines hit. Does that make sense? Right, so the Union advantage in this position is from the Union right to the Confederate left.
No. I don't think Hank would have done it this way. That's Waylon Jennings' song. Are you sure Hank would have done it this way? Okay. Let's do this. Let me do this, and we'll start on our way back because y'all had enough. Why did the attack fail? That's a problem. Okay, according to Douglas Southall Freeman, who could pick a, thank y'all, by the way, thank you, I appreciate it. Go back, thank you, I appreciate it. You're lucky lady.
Oh, thank you.
Aces high. Seventh son of a seventh son. Rhyme of the ancient mariner. All right. Freeman said that tactically this assault failed in 3 areas. Number 1, Heath's division should have never been placed in the attack. That's Pettigrew. Heath or Pettigrew. Never should have been here. 2, Lee and his staff did not ascertain the condition of the command before it was designated for further action, said Colonel Venable, Lee's staff officer. Quote, they were terribly mistaken about Heath's division in the planning. It had not recovered, having suffered more than was reported on the first day. End of quote. Davis Brigade lacked adequate field officers from the first day. The 2nd Mississippi actually had to put the cooks in the line, and the stretcher bearers had to give them muskets to fill out the ranks. Should have never been there. No one leading Pettigrew's old brigade had ever commanded on this field. That's Marshall's brigade. He still suffered from a concussion from the first day. That's not good either. Pettigrew had never led a division. Pender's division might have sufficed better than Heath's, in Freeman's opinion. Anderson might have used, that's Richard Anderson, might have used Mahone and Wilcox, or Mahone and Wright to support Pender, like Lane and Scales supported Heath. All right. Tactically, we've already done this. Tactically, the left flank was in the air. Pettigrew later told Venable, before he died, that he thought that Lawrence and Lane were to advance in echelon on his right. That's Pender's command, and that is basically, this is what Pettigrew expected. Right there, and this is what did not happen. Right there, you getting all this? The key of D. All right, I got a free guitar lesson this afternoon too. Y'all holding me up. It is interesting to note that Longstreet only placed 1 brigade behind Pickett also. All right. Trimble arrives to take command after Pender falls. That's only 16 hours after he's fallen. He is not acquainted with the men or the field. The third problem, as we pointed out, was the alignment of Mayo, that's Brockenbrough, and Davis on the left flank. These units began to unravel from the first. Right there. All right, Earl Hess, other Pickett's charge biographer. His conclusions are, quote, despite the conclusion of a modern biographer who asserted that Longstreet, quote, had devoted his full talents and energy toward preparing the assault, there are several weaknesses evident in those preparations. Longstreet failed to follow through on his good intention to explain the details of the attack at all levels of command and all units. He failed to communicate effectively with anyone outside the 1st Corps, even though 3rd Corps troops would make up more than half the attackers. He failed to devise a detailed plan to gauge whether the artillery barrage would damage the Federals enough to justify sending in the infantry. And he neglected to develop and implement detailed plans to push the guns forward in close support of the attackers. He failed to understand, mostly due to his lack of contact with the 3rd Corps and partly through Hill's reluctance to speak up, the weakened condition of Pettigrew's and Trimble's units. All of these weaknesses fall into categories of lapses of thought, not deliberate attempts to sabotage the assault. For the first time in his career, Longstreet was organizing an attack across Corps lines and utterly failed to meet the new challenge. Right there. All right, any questions?
Well, that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it was the higher headquarters' responsibility to coordinate across Corps lines.
Good God. Are you implying what I think you're implying? Who is the higher headquarters?
See, that would be the Army commander.
Oh my God. Oh no. Oh no.
Oh, the Union might have had something to do with the failure of the attack.
Thank you. It's all the Union's fault. You're right, sir. The buck stops here. Yes, sir.
Wasn't there a Union regiment on a flank that they were
On both flanks.
Yes, the 8th Ohio. And New Yorkers later. They chewed them up.
New Hampshire on the other side, wasn't it?
They basically would have been where you see the modern neighborhood. They would have been at right angles right there. It's convoluted, but that's where they end up. That's their final position. Yes.
Could you say that the Union had their issues too, in terms of placement and, blah, blah, blee, blee? Couldn't you say that the Unions just outfought the Southern troops? They just
Are we talking about Pickett's charge of the battle or something?
the whole schmear?
The whole schmear. The statement is,
schmear.
did the Union Army just flat out fight the Confederates? They did. They fought better. They got pretty much all the breaks, if you will, especially on the 2nd and 3rd day right there. The dice run cold for Robert E. Lee. But I think it is reflected in the Confederate soldiers' letters in the aftermath of the battle, that where they say something like, we fight better in Virginia. We fight better. The Yankees fight hard in their own territory. I think the Confederates drastically underestimated what they were up against and how hard these Union soldiers would fight in the end. And you have to remember too, going into this, the Confederates had always licked these guys, pretty much. They might not have won every battle, but they had achieved all of their objectives. The Union Army always withdrew if they won the battle or not. And so therefore they're coming in here and they're pretty cocky. And that goes from the privates up to the generals. And you could argue, Robert E. Lee is in there. He's too overconfident.
But Lee wanted a decisive victory in the North.
Well, the counter argument to that is, can he leave here without trying it again? Could you do it? And that's easier said than done, What I'm going to do here is I'm going to alter this plan. I'm not liking it. I'm seeing horses behind you, which you're not seeing, but I would run into those horses, and that would be a boondoggle. So what I'm going to do is we're going to use the pavement. We're going to march everybody back down the pavement and back up to where we started the program for. However, the difference is we're going to reassemble on the opposite side of the road behind the Virginia Memorial. And I'll walk y'all back there. I'll see how much room I've got back there. But I'll walk y'all back there and we'll talk about the aftermath. We'll do one stop there and then we'll turn around and go back and look at Brown's Ranch back here. And we'll do the conclusion back there. So the heart of the program is over, you'll be happy to say. And we're all going to be walking back to our cars. And I appreciate the lady in pink bearing with me right here, because we're going to get her some lunch here shortly, all right? Okay, thank y'all. We'll go back. I planned for my last tour maybe being toted across like a pharaoh, across Pickett's charge, where I would lay, no, like Caesar, where I would lay on the, you know.
Somebody feed you grapes half.
Yes, feed me grapes. What's that lady's name that hangs out in Las Vegas? The Minerva.
Elvira.
She sang that love song for the Titanic. Who? Celine Dion. She renewed her vows, and they had an Egyptian Pharaoh type wedding. Y'all should check videos of that. That's what I want for my final tour right there. Oh yeah.
Be careful. That car isn't helping with traffic.
Pat will take care of it. The mysterious red shirt man will now direct the traffic. All right, I told y'all, I was reminded that I didn't tell y'all about the 11th Mississippi Monument. So we were talking about in the beginning of the program about them wanting to place the Virginia Monument up at the high water mark with Robert E. Lee, which would have been kind of cute to say the least, right in their face. So what ends up happening though is that's shot down. They start to develop, when I say they, the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association, formed in the 1870s, has got to get a hold of this park, and they've got to do it in a hurry. Otherwise, you're going to have monuments everywhere on the park, and there's not going to be any semblance of order. And when you get in a military park, you want order, right? So what they do is they set out to create rules. Now they are not, generally because of the 72nd Pennsylvania's lawsuit, which is a whole nother story within its own right. In the 1880s, that's the guy with the club musket over there. They lose control of the battlefield, and that's going to help the War Department. The U.S. government's going to get a hold of it and basically use the GBMA's rules. So anyway, I said I'd tell you the story of the 11th Mississippi Monument. And so around mid-90s, 1990s, I should say, the park got a message from the 11th Mississippi Memorial Committee saying they wanted to place a monument on the battlefield to here. The first company of this, Company A, the first company of this regiment was from Ole Miss. And it has there's a lot of Ole Miss alumni involved in this monument committee. So we get the letter in the mid-90s and we respond to it saying that the National Park Service no longer accepts monuments, which we don't, because the veterans are all gone, at least as far as we know. If you happen to have one at your house, please let us know. We would like to recognize them right there. But we informed them we were no longer accepting monuments. After that, a couple months later, got a letter from one of their board members, if that's correct, maybe it was the chairman and so forth, and unbeknownst to us, the 11th Mississippi Monument Commission, one of their board members was a guy by the name of Trent Lott.
Oh, gee.
And Trent Lott, you'd never believe this, is an Ole Miss alumnus. And so, nothing wrong with that, right there. I know something about that. All of a sudden, the next year we were accepting one more monument. If you don't get this, you have to look up Trent Lott, and then you'll understand what I'm talking about. He was the majority leader in the Senate for a little while. When the park got ready to place the monuments, tying in the Virginia Monument story at the beginning, wanting to place it at the federal lines and so forth, when we got the task of setting the 11th Mississippi Monument, we had to go back to the original rules from the 1870s. And the original rules stipulate that no Confederate monuments can go inside Union lines. So the 11th Mississippi Monument, even in the year 2000, still had to be placed and was made to be placed right over here where it is on the Confederate side. According to GBMA rules, even 150 years after the battle, 140 years after the battle, a unit placing markers on this battlefield can place their main unit marker at their original battle line, and then they are allowed to put up subsequent smaller markers somewhere else on the battlefield. That rule was also applied, and that marker, ladies and gentlemen, if you look off in the distance, you see that white barn way over there. That marker, most people never see it, but if you've got really good eyes, you can make it out to the right of it's a light colored blip to the right of the barn along the stone wall right there. The advanced marker of the 11th Mississippi is at that location. But most people never see it because the original rules stipulate that no Confederate monuments can go inside Union lines. So even in the year 2000, I've always thought this was cool. Even in the year 2000, that Confederate monument had to still go on the Confederate side of the stone wall. And that's why most people never see it, because you can't see it from the car. So when you drive around, you get over the white barn, you'll see what I'm talking about. And that's how those rules that applied to Robert E. Lee's statue in 1907 to 1912 applied also to the 11th Mississippi in the year 2000. Kind of cool. Civil War is long over, but the rules still lived on.
So what was the impetus in the 1990s for another monument to the Civil War from the South? I mean, where'd that come from?
The impetus for it, there was a 11th Mississippi biography that came out, and the impetus is historically is the entire class from Ole Miss suffers 100% casualties in this charge. That's what's getting it. And then you get the money behind it. You have to understand Ole Miss, a lot of old money. Old money. You know, Ole Miss, we might lose the football game. We never lose the party.
Yeah. All right.
Let's go on down, man. Let's
Did you plant the tree in front of the monument there?
No, nobody. Did you cut the tank off yet? No, we didn't plant it. Okay, so let's wrap this thing up right here. I face this way so you could face this way. All right, going back to the beginning of this tour, and the Virginia Monument, why it's placed here. According to Colonel James Thompson Brown, who was Richard Ewell's chief of artillery, Lee watched the assault from near the Virginia Monument, present day. The general sat on a stump with his oilcloth spread underneath him. During the entire attack, he stayed seated on the stump, holding the reins of Traveler in his left hand while placing his right elbow on his right leg and supporting his bowed head in his right hand. As the Union troops from Stannard's brigade began huzzah and Pickett's men started to retreat, Lee moved out to meet them. As soon as the assault ended, Lee rode out. In person, he had ordered Wright to support Wilcox should he be pursued, Ambrose Wright. With Longstreet and miscellaneous staff officers, he rallied the stragglers, quote, "All will come right in the end. We'll talk it over afterwards. We want all good and true men just now." Federals began to cheer from the left, and Lee surmised that Johnson had possibly gained some success. That's Allegheny Johnson by Culp's Hill. He directed Lieutenant F.M. Colston from Alexander's Artillery Battalion to ride and find out. And Colston started, but his horse balked, and he began to whip his horse with a stick. Lee always had an affinity, a soft spot for animals. Right here. If you ever want to know something about, Well, you're perfect. You're just right on time right there. In fact, that would make a good backdrop. Why don't you come over here and stand behind me? All right. So. What happened to your buddy?
Let's go.
He said something about the South rising again. He took off, but he wasn't driving a Honda.
It's a peppermint schnapps. If you ever watch that cartoon. All right, so Colston starts whipping the horse, and Lee says, "Don't whip him, Captain, don't whip him. I've got just such another foolish horse myself, and whipping does no good." Right there. Through all of this, Lee expected a counter thrust from the enemy. He is expecting a counterattack. Why wouldn't Meade counterattack across this field? He told the slightly wounded, quote, to bind up your hurts and take up a musket. One coward playing possum, if you can imagine that, this happened right in front of you. One coward who was playing possum, he had retrieved from a ditch and set up on his feet. If you can imagine. He tried to get him to stand up, and then he had some of his staff officers go over there and pick him up and put him on his feet. How'd you like to tell your grandkids that story? Old Robert E. Lee. He told Colonel Fremantle, the British observer, quote, "This has been a sad day for us, Colonel, a sad day, but we can't always expect to win victories." Right there. Captain Bright of Pickett's staff recalled meeting Lee after the attack. He said he recorded that Lee said to Pickett, "General Pickett, place your division in rear of this hill and be ready to repel the advance of the enemy should they follow up their advantage." It's hard orders, trying to buck up a crying man. Bright would recall, quote, in parentheses, "I never heard General Lee call them the enemy before. It was always those people." Never referred to them as the enemy. General Pickett, with his head down on his breast, said, quote, "General Lee, I have no division now. Armistead is down, Garnett is down, and Kemper is mortally wounded." Then General Lee said, "Come, General Pickett, this has been my fight, and upon my shoulders rests the blame. The men and officers of your command have written the name of Virginia as high today as it ever has been written before." At that moment, several men crowded around the riders, and Lee said, "Your men have done all that men could do. The fault is entirely my own." Then turning to me, General Lee said, "Captain, what officer is that they are bearing off?" And I answered, "General Kemper." And General Lee said I must speak to him, and moved Traveler toward the litter. I moved my horse along with us, but General Pickett did not go. The four bearers, seeing it was General Lee, halted, and General Kemper, feeling the halt, opened his eyes. And General Lee said, "General Kemper, I hope you are not very seriously wounded." Kemper responded, "I am struck," this is what you don't see on the movie, "I am struck in the groin, and the ball has ranged upwards. They tell me it is mortal." And General Lee said, "I hope it will not prove so bad as that. Is there anything I can do for you, General Kemper?" And the answer came after Kemper had seemingly with much pain raised himself on one elbow. "Yes, General Lee, do full justice to this division for its work today." General Lee bowed his head and said, "I will." All right. Some other accounts have preceding this have Lee riding off to the left as the flank of Pettigrew broke. That'd be back there where the North Carolina monument was, where we were earlier, and then riding back to the right. We know at some point he did stop with Alexander for a while, where he scolded the soldier for whipping the horse. That's E.P. Alexander. One account has him also meeting General Cadmus Wilcox, who went into the assault Pickett's charge really late. General Lee, Wilcox said with tears streaming down his face, "I came into Pennsylvania with one of the finest brigades in the Army of Northern Virginia, and now my people are gone. They have all been killed." Lee shook his head sadly. "Never mind, General. All this has been my fault. It is I that have lost this fight, and you must help me out of it the best that you can. All right. To show you, in conclusion, which I'm way over time, right here. I have it somewhere. Air conditioning. I don't blame them. Okay. The Lord does not wish for me to finish this tour, and I realize that. Okay. When you get finished with the tour, if you look behind it, I'm within 5 minutes of doing that. If you look right here, this is where I'm talking about. I'm not going to drag everybody over here. We've basically got so many people. You're welcome to join us. We got so many people over here, it would be a boondoggle. But walk out, go over there to that tree line and look toward you can barely see them through the tree line. There's some white buildings way off in the distance. That is the Brown Ranch. And we are very lucky. That is not park property, so don't go out there shooing the biting cows over there, all right? But I am very happy. This was done way back in the day. I want to say 1970s, 1980s. The government did get a scenic easement on the Brown Ranch, which is actually better than actually owning it. That allows the people to continue to use this ranch for agriculture as it was originally intended, but it keeps it from being developed. And I think that's the ultimate in as far as ownership. It also keeps the property on the tax rolls too, so it doesn't take anything away from the local, put more burden on the local tax owners. Anyway, the Brown Ranch, if you look at the house, it's like Dallas, you know, the Ewing, what was that, South Fork out there. If you look at the house and the main house, my understanding is there's two side wings to it and a main center. My understanding is the center of the house is the original portion. That would have been there in 1863. Okay, so keep that in mind when you look at it. That is what is known as A.P. Hill's headquarters, the Brown Ranch. Now, in the aftermath of this, when you walk back there also, you will see meandering through the middle of this field out here, there's a stream. Now, before the attack began, before Pickett's division came into position, they actually bivouacked back here on these fields. This is where they filled their canteens up before they were marched around. As you go down the tour road today, you will get to the rise and then descend before you start up to the Longstreet Monument and the amphitheater over there. They marched through that declivity right there, that little valley, for lack of a better word, and they come into position on the other side of Spangler Woods. That's how they get into position. After the attack is over, when all these thousands of Virginians are streaming back through here, they don't reform right here. They actually go back to where they were in the morning. And back here in this stream, if you want to imagine it, this is where they bathe their wounds. And they start to regroup. It's just a mob. Commands are all separated. There's no military organization and so forth. And you can imagine thousands of them again just milling about this stream right there. So General Pickett is going to inform his men after he cranks up his Ford Super Duty pickup truck. You can go back to the wagons, that's over here by Chambersburg Pike, and rest until you're wanted. So all these soldiers, after Lee leaves Pickett rides back here, he gets in the midst. He's on horseback, so he's hovering over all these men, and he tells his men they can go. Just go. And I would love to know where this took place, but this mob of Virginians and other miscellaneous Confederate soldiers start marching through this valley back behind this tree line. and there's a modern neighborhood that borders the Brown Ranch. What would that be? To the north of the Brown Ranch over here. And as they get into that area right there, they come to a cul-de-sac of some type. And the Confederate Provost Guard has set up a picket line right through here. And what they're doing is they've got a bottleneck, and they're standing at the end, or the head of that bottleneck, and they're corralling all of the Virginians to get them back in the line. And I've got a quote right here, because you don't hear about this very often. Captain H.T. Owen of the 18th Virginia wrote, "At this point there's a bluff on one side and a slight swamp on the other, creating a narrow pass through which the fugitives, without distinction of rank, officers and privates, side by side, pushed, poured, and rushed in a continuous stream, throwing away guns, blankets, and haversacks as they hurried on in the confusion toward the rear. Here another effort was made to rally the broken troops, and all sorts of appeals and threats were made to the officers and men, who turned a deaf ear and hurried on. Some of the officers even jerking loose with an oath from the hand laid on their shoulders to attract attention. At last a few privates, hearkening to the appeals, halted and formed a nucleus around which about 30 others soon rallied, and with these a picket was formed across the road as a barrier to further retreat, and the stream of stragglers dammed up several hundred strong." Into this, ladies and gentlemen, if you can imagine this happening, into this is going to come George Pickett himself. And Pickett comes riding up, and they noticed he intervened for the men, telling this makeshift guard, "Don't stop any of my men. Tell them to come to the camp we occupied last night." Owen noted that Pickett was riding without any staff and seemed to be weeping unabashedly. Even after all this time, George Pickett is still has tears streaming down his face. So I want to conclude with this. What I hope you learned from today is a lot of minutia and a lot of planning about Pickett's charge, more than you ever wanted to know right here. The second thing I wanted you to find out is that Pickett's charge was not as beautiful in execution as you might think. The third that I wanted you to realize is, despite the Confederate Army regrouping and returning to fight again, and there will be some great moments, some success for these very troops that were defeated here. I mean, it's combat, you know, it's up and down over the course of 4 years. Pickett's division will never be the same, especially once they get back to Virginia. They have and especially over in 1864, Pickett's division starts to desert very badly. Pickett's division never recovers from the attack here on July 3rd. And they're so close to home, Virginians being in Virginia, that it's easy for them to desert, say, somebody from Mississippi wanting to get back home there. You just can't do that. So with that in mind, that's unfortunate, but Pickett's division will never really reassemble. They will be sent down to North Carolina to be refitted, probably to keep the desertion rate down, but by the time they get back to Petersburg, that's later war, like the year after Gettysburg, they're really going to be hard-pressed to keep them in the ranks, and especially after Abraham Lincoln is reelected. What I wanted to illustrate to you here today with that story about Pickett's division breaking on you is that they just didn't come back. When Robert E. Lee does this great rally, which is one of my favorite moments from Robert E. Lee's career, how many people will go out there and say it's all my fault instantly? How many times have you ever heard that when you were married? Very rarely, okay? You very rarely see that or hear that, okay? Nobody looks at each other. So, if you think about it, that is unique for Robert E. Lee, but he wanted to quell any, like, hard feelings. It's my fault. You want to blame somebody? It's all my fault. A lot of the men stopped for Robert E. Lee that day. But my point is, a lot of the men went right on past him. Got back to that stream. They were just, had a mob mentality, and they broke. These are some of the finest troops in the Army of Northern Virginia. and they cannot be corralled and they cannot be contained because of what they went through. What they went through in 45 minutes. That's the reality of it. The reverse side of Pickett's charge. The losses that the troops sustained in some cases can never be made up. All right, I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but it's now 1:04. According to this watch right over here from Messiah, Mr. Messiah right over here. It's good to see him again as always. Always good to see the Messiah right over here. Did you bring me a hat?
Next time, man.
Next time I'm gonna get a hat right here. I don't think I've told you this, but there's actually a Civil War music muster going on at the Visitor Center, and there's bands all afternoon, and we'll be playing tonight if it doesn't rain at the Pennsylvania Memorial. If I haven't told you, please come out to the Civil War music muster, and I will see you back there under the tents as I resume command of instruments I cannot play. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.